الطريق إلى الأمام. هذه النقطة سيشرح لنا دكتور أمجد فريد بعون الله.
Next up, what will sure be a very passionate presentation. It will be given by Dr. Amgad Fareid, the Executive Director of Fikra Studies for Development.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome and thank you for attending this conference. I'm going to present the way forward that we are looking at how we can realize and materialize the outcomes of this conference into something that can help our people on the ground. I can start by saying that this conference is not an event. We look at it as the beginning of a process that we hope it will materialize soon on the ground as into effective means to revitalize the humanitarian aid process to Sudan. And to this end, only the truth can save us. We will need to address the serial gaps that impede the international community and the local respondent from effective humanitarian aid delivery into the biggest humanitarian crisis in terms of number after 7 wars since the war erupted in my country. The numbers speak for themselves. We have thousands of civilians who were killed in crossfire. We have 7.5 million IDPs and refugees who were forced to flee their homes. We have over 25 million Sudanese, more than half of the population, on the edge of famine. We have 19 million children who were forced out their schools. And we have countless civilians trapped in besieged areas, as my colleague just presented, with no access to food, water, health care, and any other basic needs. We have many of those who were in the besieged areas died and lost their lives because of starvation. And the numbers can go on and on and on. And in this presentation, I hope that I can present few ideas and suggestions that can help shaping the way forward. This starts by addressing the biggest issue, which is the humanitarian aid. Humanitarian access and protection of civilians are not matters of negotiations. These are rights granted to the civilian in the situation of war by the International Humanitarian Law and Geneva Convention. We cannot renegotiate Geneva Convention after more than 60 years of the end of the Second War. And allowing the warring parties to negotiate what the humanity agreed on in 1945 is not acceptable. It's not acceptable at all. And it gives them also the chance to use their humanitarian commitments and their legal commitment and their violation as pressure cards for political maneuvering and military gains. This needs to stop. And arrangement for humanitarian provision and of the provision of humanitarian assistance should be separated and independent from all military and political discussion. These are basic rights of civilians, not pressure cards, and should not be weaponized. Furthermore, these arrangements should take place in the ground. It cannot happen from abroad, and it cannot happen from distance, and it cannot happen by proxy. The different international aid organizations, and mainly the UN organizations, needs to go back to the conflict areas, needs to go back to Darfur, needs to go back to Khartoum, it needs to go back to this besieged area and negotiate directly with the field commanders on the ground on the arrangements of humanitarian aid delivery. And this will also have an added value. We saw it in the example of UNAMID. Their presence on the ground in the conflict area would prevent the warring parties of committing more violation. We saw that not in Liberia, not in Palestine. We saw it in Sudan. We saw it in Darfur. As many criticized UNAMID, but its presence provides a lot of protection to the civilians there. The second thing, that the civilian voice should always be represented. especially in the humanitarian discussion. But which civilians? Which civilians who are to be represented in this discussion? Of course, it's not me, and it's not my fellow friends in the political class. It is those first respondents, those volunteers in the emergency room, in the youth initiative, in the local initiative, those who are present in the ground delivering the aid are the ones to be represented in the humanitarian arrangements. They are suffering a lot of harassment from all parties. They are being arrested, they are being killed, they are being tortured, they are being attacked from all parties. The protection of those grassroots volunteers should be on the top of the agenda. I repeat again at the end of this point that humanitarian discussions and commitments should not be used for any political gains or bargaining as bargaining cards by any of the stakeholders, and I mean all stakeholders, domestic, regional, and international. Humanitarian aid should be delivered and should happen, period. The third part that's very important The third point that's very much important is the localization. Since the beginning of the war, the local respondents and the volunteers in the emergency room, in the different initiatives, were the first to respond to the crisis in Sudan. And they helped not only the Sudanese, but many of the diplomats, and I see many of them in this room, and I think they are there because they know that those who attended helped in evacuating them from the fighting area. Those volunteers in the emergency room did not help only Sudanese. They allowed the Sudanese state to actually continue existence while the people who were supposed theoretically to be protecting us were fighting above our head. They evacuate people trapped in the fighting areas. They opened passages for delivery of aid. They helped in reopening and reestablishing health centers, delivering food, water, basic needs. What they did was an amazing job. They need to be supported, and they need to be supported on their terms, not on the donor community terms. You cannot force them. You cannot force them while that they are the only effective method to delivering of aid right now. You cannot force them to change their tactics that were, at least and until now. And there is no way to plan for an effective humanitarian process without having these volunteers or entities and their experiences and the lesson learned in the past 7 months in the heart of the process. The pre-war humanitarian architecture needs to adapt and restructure to be capable to respond to the crisis. And for this, we suggest establishing, I know many of you, especially from the international community, were yesterday in the coordination discussion, in the working group for the coordination and integration. And I hear, while I didn't attend it myself, I hear it was heated discussion. And that's good. That's good because we need to maintain it. And that's why we are suggesting establishing a coordination mechanism between these local initiatives, between the emergency room, between the first respondents, and between the international community. We need to look at this as an opportunity to create a platform that facilitates the exchange of skills and information. And we have to remember that each and every hard situation is also a learning opportunity. As we always advise from the humanitarian community, the vulnerable communities to be resilient, we also need the aid organization to be flexible and open to learning from the practical experiences. Humanitarian work cannot be routine. And humanitarian work and the situation in Sudan cannot be dealt as business as usual. It cannot. And here I'm repeating myself just again because I forgot this slide. The fourth important point is the decentralization. Sudan is very big, and the area of the conflict is vast, and there are different responses in different areas. Depending on the local settings, these first respondents, they all found the best tactics and ways to respond to the crisis and mitigate it. And there is no practical way to centralize this right now. There is no practical way, especially with the absence of the big organization, there is no way to centralize the response. Any attempt to centralize the emergency room and the local grassroots initiative will just decrease its effectiveness. They utilize the creativity. We need to utilize the creativity of the local respondent in addressing the crisis in their respective situation and as per their terms. One last essential point, which is a cornerstone for all of this, is that we need all together to ensure that the emergency room and other local initiatives continue to maintain their impartiality. The emergency room and the local respondents are the ones who are presenting help to all right now. We need to keep them away from any attempt of politicization or any political shadows. And by that, I mean from all of us, away from the ground. We should not try in any means, whether domestic, regional, and international, to politicize the humanitarian aid delivery. We are presenting these proposals and suggestions as highlights, and in the coming days, the technical working groups will continue to work and will continue their effort in communicating with all the participants in order to develop a practical framework and realistic plan to materialize these recommendations. This plan will be actively shared with all parties and with all stakeholders who are related to the conflict and in Sudan. It will also include a detailed need assessment based on the presentation and reports presented by those coming from inside Sudan. And the aim of this framework is to revitalize the response to the humanitarian crisis. This conference is intended to unleash hope for a better humanitarian response in Sudan and serve as a reminder that our combined international effort is not supposed to bring us to heaven. It's supposed to save us from hell. May God save Sudan and the people of Sudan. Thank you very much.